Let's have a talk, let's have a chat, talking about a little this and that. Hello and welcome to another episode of This and That. I am your host, Mary Easterling, and today we are not doing something by Bob Newman, but we are continuing on with the series Babylon. In the last couple of items we did by Bob Newman, the gainsaying of Korah came up in Jude verse 11. Woe to them, for they went in the way of Cain and ran riotously in the error of Balaam for hire and perished in Korah's gainsaying or rebellion. So, we will be talking about Korah's gainsaying or rebellion today on This and That. But before I begin to listen to anything else from This and That, go to talkingaboutthисandthat.wordpress.com and click on the podcast link. Since this is not from Bob Newman, it will not be on our blog page, so you can only listen. You cannot look. According to Strong's, there are 51 occurrences of this name, Korah. Most of them are before the rebellion. In other words, they're genealogical. So-and-so had a kid named Korah. But that's not going to be the Korah we're talking about. So a lot of these get kind of put aside. There's only one, 50 occurrences in the Old Testament and one in the New. And that is what I just read. Jude, verse 11. Woe to them, for they went in the way of Cain, ran riotously in the error of Balaam for hire, and perished in Korah's rebellion. They perished in the Korah's rebellion, and that was epic. God actually did a thing he had never been heard of to do before. He opened up the ground under the tent of the man and his conspirators, and they all went down into the crack, and then he closed the crack. Ew. There are ways to die, and there are ways to die, and that was quick. Wow, I mean, the other scripture comes to mind, and it's about the rock. If it falls on you, you will be crushed. Matthew 21:44, and whoever falls on this stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. Luke 20:18, whoever falls on that stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. This is the gospel, and this is the Lord our God in the flesh talking. But can we have a witness? Because we get one in the Old Testament. Good old Daniel talks about the rock that falls on the feet of the statue and crushes them. Daniel 2:34. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Something about the rod that breaks the nation into pieces may co-equate to the concept of the rock. Oh wait, that would be Jesus Christ? Or is it the rock of the confession that he is Jesus Christ? Ooh, Peter. In this instance, the rock is Christ, and the feet of the statue is the uneasy alliance between Rome and Israel, who is now under their rule. The crush is Christendom, that even without the Catholic Church would still dominate all. Remember, this is not actually about world domination. It's about a people being birthed forth and existing until the king comes and takes them. It's a remnant, but it's still his. So the idea of the crust, the rocky crust crushing the rebellion, is nothing new to God. In fact, you take it one step further, you might realize that the cross is the crushing rock to Satan, the penultimate Korah. Ooh, what? But before I get to that, let's actually look back at the whole story of Korah. Korah's rebellion, number 16, the story of the gainsaying of Korah. A Levite, a Kohathite, conspires with 3 Reubenites to raise up 250 men to challenge Moses as leader of the people, alongside Aaron as the people's priest. For the last several chapters, Moses has been laying down the law. God talks to Moses, says, now Moshe, talk to the people. Tell them this is this and that is that. And Moses goes and talks to the people and says, God has said this is this and that is that. Moreover, he's apparently writing all this down in a book or a scroll. All this law laid down is getting old and restrictions abound. Moreover, Moses seems to be also putting up the tabernacle and setting that in order. And then maybe he can just go in behind the veil. Maybe not. But he sure does have a privy audience, and his tent, I mean, who went up to the mountain twice, an 80-day fast, and came down glowing? Yeah. So number 16, 1 through 3. Here's the story. Now Korah, son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, son of Pelet, sons of Reuben, took men, and they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel. 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said, "You take too much on yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" This is how it starts. But is there something deeper here at work? Korah, he's a Kohathite of Levi. This is his family's business. The Kohathites within the Levitical community were responsible for handling the most sacred and delicate objects of the tabernacle, including the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, and lampstand. Let's not forget all the rest of the accoutrement. Okay, so they didn't pack it. The priest did. They never went inside to see the pretty after it was installed. The priests could, but they carried it. They weren't dealing with ox carts. No, they had this thing hanging on poles. It wasn't nice. This was a hand carry. This was grunt work. I can imagine maybe they're not so happy. Maybe their shoulders hurt. I don't know. But Moses, this guy is the quote-unquote does-it-all guy. Why, he slices and dices right through the gods of Egypt, right? Wrong. He was the guy who talked to Aaron, who talked to everyone, and he just did stuff, simple stuff like use a stick, throw kiln dust up, let it come down, create boils, say stuff. Thing is, his actions and words were what God used to spank the gods of Egypt. Egypt, for all its propaganda, never mentions this, of course. There are, however, a lot of defaced areas on all those walls and whatnot of Egypt. Maybe this is among them. Consider the embarrassment. All that Karnak and the obelisk and that's just billboard propaganda, folks. That's the internet of the day. You have people equating themselves with deities to prop themselves up, but that's the Egyptian way. That's how it's done in good old Crosstown, Egypt. So, indications are that most of the Kohathites were okay with their lot in life, but this guy teamed up with Reubenite, and Reuben does sort of have an axe to grind. He was the firstborn, but he went up to his daddy's couch and laid with his daddy's concubine and lost his place, defiling things, costing him the preeminent status that went to Judah. Maybe they never forgot this. I don't know. But this is not Daddy Jacob they're in cahoots against, so what gives? Grind your axe with the right guy. Why are you going after a Levite? Well, it's not endemic, but it is happening in the desert. See, there's something more at work here. It's not fun in the desert now. Now that the judgment is levied against the men of the day, you shall not enter in. Because they reacted to the wrong report, God got mad. So they have to move from water to water to water. Only sometimes the water wasn't readily available. You can't blame city folks for not handling homesteading in the desert very well now, can you? But you can wonder why, after all, they've seen their God do. Oh boy, I'm going to start preaching to the choir. Y'all can just listen now. I'm going to preach to me. After all they've seen their God do, the fact that they could plainly see him with them, and they couldn't simply just trust. Trust doesn't come easy. That's hard. But then again, they were a famous people for their stubbornness, now weren't they? But the select group of the peeps, the rock stars who tended to the showbread, hefted the furniture on the move, and later on became part of the glee club, as well as being gatekeepers and assistants to the priests. So they were in the quote-unquote club. But for some, that wasn't enough. The point is that they were satisfied with their place in the quote-unquote kingdom. For if you think about it real hard, that nation on the move was like a kingdom, looking for a place to rule out of. In Joshua's day, they would find it, right where God told Abraham it would be. Canaan land, Canaan land. Problem is, this guy was with the bunch who rebelled and were shut out for the 40-year wander. So then perhaps it was a This is it? This is all I get moment? Like coming to Jesus and finding that it isn't about you, it's about Him. Humble was not in these guys' vocabulary. But there's a deeper lesson here. But this is like someone else we all know and hate. One Hillel, a.k.a. Lucifer. Now, this is the epic of the guy who had it all as an angel and fell from a long height. Isaiah 14:12 through 15. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, Hillel, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you've said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mounts of the congregation of the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. And its witness, this is one. Isaiah is 1. Ezekiel is 2. 28:12 through 19. Son of man, take up a lamentation against the king of Tyre. Say to him, thus says the Lord God, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were, guess where he was? You want to talk about snake in the tree? Miss Eve's deception? Why would she have talked to him at the tree? The wrong tree. Why would she have talked to him ever? Seems we have an answer. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, turquoise, emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. Oh my God, full stop. We like to think of Eden as a garden. Eden had something in it. Stone, gold, music. And timbrel means, give me the beat, boys, and let me... Give me the beat, heartbeat, percussive beat, the dance romance. Okay. And these were prepared for him when he was made. He was a musician. Verse 14, you were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. Oh, wait. So he wasn't just schlepping around in Eden. He was also on Zion's mount, on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Verse 15, you were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, you covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stone. Oh, wait, so where do you think he went to? What was the other place he was wont to inhabit? Eden. He ain't so purty now. He don't sing so well anymore, and his musician skills are probably lacking. But Eve, I don't know. What's the connection? Does she take pity on the poor broken thing? I mean, we are the fairer sex, and we do tend to pity the babies, the kitties, the puppies. I mean, the broken thing. We want to fix them. We want to nurture them. We want to nurse them back to health. It's what we do. Pure conjecture there, but think about it. Verse 17, your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground and laid you before kings that they might gaze at you. You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trading. Therefore I brought fire from your midst. It devoured you and turned you to ashes on the earth in the sight of all who saw you. And all who knew you among the peoples are astonished at you. You've become a horror, and you shall be no more forever. This is two witnesses. In Ezekiel we have a statement. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. A seal, perfect, anointed. Can it be that this angel might possibly, this is really speculative, have had the Holy Spirit in him or on him? I'll just let that go. But why did he fall? What was the problem? Ezekiel 28:17, Part A. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. A seal of perfection, of loveliness, and of wisdom. An angel of covering. God never touches much on the whole purpose of this function, but that he wasn't satisfied. Hillel wanted more. Envy is our sin. One of the commandments was not to envy or rather, to covet. Why? It leads to rebellion. And here we get a third witness from the New Testament. Hello, James. James 4:2. You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. Of course, there's also 4:3 that talks about you have not because you might be asking amiss because you want to spend it on yourself. Ooh, that wasn't very nice. No, it wasn't. But that's also coveting. In fact, that's vanity. So, when we get to murder, we find ourselves looking at Cain. But that's not for this broadcast. The coveting often leads to the contriving to get. Then we find ourselves at the sin of David and Bathsheba. David saw her and had someone go find her, bring her over to the big house, had himself a little romance. Problem is, she got pregnant. David tries to hide the problem by getting the hubby to come back from the battlefront to sleep with the good wife so that she can say, oh, you made me pregnant. Oh, how nice. Hittites apparently don't do this. They tend to sleep with their Lord's servants. They're like, I don't know, warriors and loyal. So apparently going and having rum and rut with the good wife is not something a Hittite does at wartime. David didn't know that, I guess, because, that was an epic fail. So when that didn't work, he had his loyal fighter killed in the battle. Pens a letter to the commander, set him in the fiercest part of the battle, and then pull back. Let him die. Joab always had a bone to pick with David over that one. Never quite set with the old boy. Wonder why. Nathan had a few choice words for David. Right. Sure enough, of course. Then he weds the babe, but the love child dies as a result. Of course, then there was Solomon. Turns out he wasn't any better at keeping things in check down below either. He liked the exotics. I wonder where he got that idea from. Oh, see, David had a heart after God. David really did love God, but the dude was a hot mess downstairs. I mean, red-blooded Hebrew boy. Right here we have coveting and murder. David, Bathsheba, Uriah the Hittite, coveting and murder. Interesting. But back to Hillel. Isaiah 14:13 through 14. For you said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Now, he might have walked on the mount of the congregation amongst the stones of fire, and also did his musical thing or his teaching or his trade or I don't know down in Eden with the hominids. But to exalt his throne, what throne? Throne says, I rule here. He was an anointed cherub that covered. There ain't nothing in there about rulership. All of this is job, job, job. And I don't mean the book of Job. I mean job as in employed. He's an employee of the Most High God. Stars of God were the angels. Well, he was a star of God. He was an angel. That he was going to put his rule above them. Oh, wait. Well, that's a place I didn't think I was going to go. Because guess who else is going to try and do this? Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and on. With 250 other people right in there in the mix. Yeah, Then he said, I'll ascend above the heights of the clouds. Well, all right, fine. You want to go fly high? Be my guest. But to end it with, I will be like the Most High, that's where, who is like the Most High? Jesus, the Most High, in a skin suit for all the hominids to see and crucify. Yeah, no, the Almighty parading about in a skin suit, modestly covered by proper attire. Didn't get him very far. Got him nailed. It got him beaten to a bloody pulp, whipped, ripped apart, and crucified. Oh, wait, but that's why he came here. That's what he wanted to do. Oh, no, it got him everywhere he wanted to go. Oh, woohoo! So, now Korah. He had a problem with whom? Moses or God? Moses had, as I said, been previously, quote-unquote, laying down the law. It was he who came down and took the calf, ground it up, threw it in the water that they were drinking, and made them drink it. and then had everyone slaughter, quote-unquote, each his neighbor who had been involved in the whole affair. So perhaps not the entire camp was involved, sort of like the churches that the Lamb had issue with in Revelation. Not everyone was participating in the quote-unquote sin. So on the one hand, this is about the perception of being quote-unquote lorded over by one whom most of these men marked as the former quote-unquote princeling of Egypt. Seems you can't take all the royal house out of the personality of the man or the past out of others' mind. This is nothing new. For Dathan, Abiram, and on alongside the 250 others, this might be the raw and the chafe, but we never hear about them. Only Korah. Why? Well, let's see. We have a twofold issue here. On the one hand, this is a direct challenge to God's ordained authority. On the other, it's simple covetousness. Moses falls on his face before God and before Korah. It said he was the quote-unquote meekest man alive. It was cool to see Superman giving it to quote-unquote the man and watching the grand poobah of the whole pharaonic army drown as the walls of water close in on them with massive concussive force. I also want to say this. It's been said that Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, the Reed Sea, Red Sea, Reed Sea, is shallow, and one can walk it at low tide. But with wagons, little ones, animals, primarily sheep, 5 or 6 foot of water, even 2 or 4 foot of water might have been insurmountable and uncrossable for a people with wagons, let alone small, low-flung living things in tow like, I don't know, sheepsies and goatsies. The cows might be okay, but the sheep might have a little problem with this. And the goats, I don't know. The wagon wheels in water like this for the long haul, and Yam Suf at the Sea of Reeds? Now, they had to go on dry land. The reed bottom had to harden enough not to rut the wheels and bog down the hooves and the little feet. But as the army of God was already past a certain point, and the pharaonic army starts going in, God might be starting to seep the bottom back, softening it under their chariot wheels, making them run into the wagon tracks, which are not going to be the same size in separation as the chariot wheel, making them break, rut, run aground, flounder, making the horses have a heck of a time trying to keep traction while they're pulling said chariots. So while they're getting slowed down and the other people are all the way up ahead, time the last person gets his teeny tiny little foot off the bottom and back up to the height where when the water hits the rock, they'll be safe. God's like, well, we're done with this. And all he has to do is the 2 virtual pillared walls of water held in suspension on either side of the cut. He just has to let them collapse. Anything trapped inside the cut would be slammed with concussive force that would be like a wrecking ball, breaking bones and chariots in the undertow at the same time. The bottom would also stir up, and if this is reeds, then that too becomes another death trap. In that, we might actually have started at one end of the trap with the army closing in on them like a zipper. That's debatable, but think about it. Just think about it. All he has to do is let go and let the water fall in on itself. All that because Moses held a stick over the waters and prayed all night? I mean, jaw-dropping Superman. We're all past that now, and God was angry because we, the peeps, wouldn't cross over, so now we get what? A dictator? Was Moses this? Now, if he's the most meekest man they ever saw, how could that be? So we are right back at the interior need to be the big man on campus. That's Korah's, Dathan's, Abiram's, and On's problem, along with the 250. Moses responds, not to the men, but to Korah, to the Levites. Numbers 16, 8 through 11. Then Moses said to Korah, hear now, you sons of Levi, is it a small thing that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to serve them? And that he brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you? Are you seeking the priesthood also? Therefore you and all your family are gathered together against the Lord. What is Aaron that you complain against him? You sons of Levi. So Korah might not have been the only one. There was a general malcontentment going on here, wasn't there? Then again, all over the Torah scrolls, after Exodus, there's a discontentment, a testing of God, a mistrust at all from among all the peeps, not just the Levites. Everybody was doing it. Seems the peeps are less than grateful for the handout from the gutter, because now they have to come together and be a people and undertake the responsibility for being self-governed under the hand of their quote-unquote deliverer. And it was not Moses. Moses was the hand God used. So, back to Korah. Was it a little thing to have them segregated out to be the ones who serviced God exclusively? No, it was actually a very big thing, an important deal to God. If he didn't, then every firstborn male would have been inducted into the priesthood. If you recall that these men were numbered and quote-unquote taken, and every child over the quote-unquote limit had to pay a fee to be quote-unquote excused from service, or maybe even from becoming a human sacrifice. Consider the words of the Lord when he took the firstborn of Egypt. All the firstborn now belong to me, period. For God, with man, it is way simpler to gather one tribe out of 12 and use them as quote-unquote firstborns perpetually, as it is then to go through the hassle of either having mothers send their firstborn men to the quote-unquote meeting house to learn the quote-unquote priestcraft, and those who wouldn't would simply find a dead son in the morning. Selah. But there's a more specific issue at hand. Rank and file. The way this was done, Moses, older brother, gets to be the priestly big kahuna. The other Levitical relatives have to settle for sloppy seconds. Aaron, who had made the golden cow a la Egyptian, because that's what he knew, he gets to come unto God himself? Yes, so Aaron, who stood with Moses back at Egypt, was Superman's Tonto, or Bucky, or Robin, might be given something of privilege by God, and after all, isn't that up to God to decide? And that's the point. Numbers 16, 9, and 10. Is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to God himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to serve them? And that he brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you? Are you seeking the priesthood also? They were brought near. They had prestige. They had importance. These guys were doing the all-important grunt work of hand-carrying the things that God specifically had made to mirror the quote-unquote heavenly on quote-unquote earth. They all saw them when they were being made, but now they're not allowed to see the quote-unquote pretty room. Yes, all of them saw the fabrics being loomed and oohed and awed at it. They all saw it in its pieces. Everyone saw it. But after assembly, there were suddenly rules, and the quote-unquote peeps couldn't just come and gaze. Why? Because it went from quote-unquote pretty to quote-unquote sacrosanct, quote-unquote sacred, and set apart unto God alone. From common to specific, like the communion elements of the bread and the juice. But they didn't wear the quote-unquote garments of the priests of Aaron's family. No, the Levites didn't. Doesn't exactly say. I'm not sure what the Levites wore. They probably just wore something like the priests, but not like the high priest. They all got a share of the quote-unquote gifts, but it just didn't sit well. Why Aaron? Why not me? Jealousy, envy, coveting, all the things of the quote-unquote flesh. But that's not the whole point, is it? It might have been if it had been one man, but there were four, Dathan, Abiram, and On. These are Reubenites, not Levites. The 250, where do they fit in? They have censers or swingy things. You know, the swingy things you see at the Catholic Mass. It smokes. It has incense on it. So might they be Levites? Does it say, or does it? And it does. Number 16:2 identifies the 250. And they rose before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown, representatives of the congregation with censers, leadership of the nation. But where does this come from? Recall that Moses sat with a line around the block from morning to evening like a king holding court, and his father-in-law saw it and said, "Hey, son-in-law, you're going to wear yourself out and the people out at this rate. Why not do, quote-unquote, this?" And the man proceeds to give Moses the first law, structure. Then he goes home. High priest of El Elyon, or God Most High, might have had an ear after all, enough to give, quote-unquote, Superman a break. Exodus 18:17 through 27. Here's my proof. Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You're not able to perform it all by yourself. Listen now to my voice. I'll give you counsel. God be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God, and teach them the statutes and the laws. Show them the way in which they must walk and the work they must do. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place them over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, rulers of 10. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they could bring it to you, but every small matter they themselves would judge. So it will be easier for you. They will bear the burden with you." Full stop. It just hit me. The mill equivalent to this is your modern-day apostle. The apostle can go on cleaning the toilets, reading the book, doing not much of nothing, just kind of hanging, serving, whatever, watching. But the elders know who that apostle is, and when the hard stuff happens, the elders can go to the apostle, pray together, hear God together, get a word, get a rendering, get an understanding, get some wisdom. Oh, wait, what? Wow. And this is coming right in the middle of the broadcast. Well, all righty, God. Exodus 18:23. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all this people will also go to their place in peace. So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said, and chose able men out of all Israel, and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50, rulers of 10. So they judged the people at all times. The hard cases were brought to Moses, but they judged every small case themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way to his own land. Right here we have a familiar pattern. The first church. Call is the Church of the Water Drawn, or Moses' house, or the First Assembly of Moses. Either way, Moses was the quote-unquote pastor / apostle / bishop. Pope? Where do you think Catholicism got its pattern from? You need to understand that the roots of the Catholic Church started when the body of Christ was given dominion on earth to rule over the nation of Rome. Yes, there was an emperor, but you realize that the quote-unquote Roman Caesar, now emperor, increasingly aligned more and more with the church and allowed it to run things more and more. Then you start to understand papal authority. It wound up becoming absolute, so a papal death is a really big deal. And each new one is as big a deal because these are the new priests / kings. This is why cardinals, or quote-unquote primes, are also called princes. Now the context hits home. This is your first church split. Yes, good morning, good evening, and good night. I said it. This is your first church split. But since this is a theocracy, it's also your first civil war. You see, in this instance, Moses is not the king, but merely the king's rep. God is the king. He made Moses listen to Jethro / Reuel and set up the structure for government in the nation. It was after this that we start to see law and priesthood happening. Fact is that this is not ever to be a one-man show, but the body corporate where all share the load. Paul's body, where you have ears, eyes, and other parts like feet, and each needs the other. Each is to have a part in the church service, but you still have a structure, elder, deacon, etc., even the penguin suit at the door, which is basically your gatekeeper. Funny how an apostolic might reside right there. In point of reference, Moses did not go up to the mountain until Exodus 19 through 24. Neither was the law given until structure was established. But like all structure, you will have, quote unquote, rank and file, greaters and lessers. But these were then the tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands, prominent men with an axe to grind, because by this time we've lost our chance to enter the promised land and are dropping like flies in the wilderness. So this is a big deal. Now, I use Bible Hub for my online scripture references, and sometimes it delivers real dish and dirt. Listen to the cross references for this little kerfluffle. Jude 1:11. Woe to them! They have traveled the path of Cain. They have rushed headlong into the error of Balaam. They have perished in Korah's rebellion. 2 Peter 2:10. Such punishment is especially reserved for those who indulge the corrupt desires of the flesh and despise authority, bold and self-willed. They're unafraid to slander glorious beings. Of course, I'm not sure I would call Moses or Aaron, quote-unquote, glorious beings, but they still are ordained. 1 Samuel 15:23. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance is like the wickedness of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Here it is, the sin. Like the sin of divination, like the wickedness of idolatry. Why? Rejecting the word, or rather the express will of God. You do realize when God speaks, he's expressing either opinion or will. Usually opinion on his part is will. Oh, but yes, let's look at some more, because Paul had a word or two to say about it, and he had his own share of stuff thrown at him, like being stoned and left for dead. 1 Corinthians 10:10. And do not complain as some of them did and were killed by the destroying angel. Hebrews 3:16. For who are the ones who heard and rebelled? Were they not all these Moses led out of Egypt? 1 Timothy 6:3-5. If anyone teaches another doctrine and disagrees with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ, and with godly teaching, he is conceited and understands nothing. Instead, he has an unhealthy interest in controversies and disputes about words, out of which come envy, strife, abusive talk, evil suspicions, and constant friction between men of depraved mind who are devoid of the truth. These men regard godliness as a means of gain. Ouch! Romans 13:1-2. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, but there is no authority except that which is from God. The authorities that exist have been appointed by God. Consequently, whoever resists authority is opposing what God has set in place, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Double ouch, because we're talking about secular authority, and that's not even going to be godly. 2 Timothy 3:8. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so also these men oppose the truth. They are depraved in mind and disqualified from the faith. Depraved and disqualified? What does one do with such? Oh, open the ground underneath the tent, dispose of them, or immolate them to a crisp. I mentioned Samuel from the Old Testament, but that's not the only witnesses we have. David put a fine point on it. Psalm 106:16-18. In the camp they envied Moses as well as Aaron, the Holy One of the Lord. The earth opened up and swallowed Dathan, and it covered over the assembly of Abiram. Then fire blazed through their company, flames consumed the wicked. Deuteronomy 11:6. And what he did in the midst of all the Israelites, Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab the Reubenite, when the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, their households, their tents, and every living thing that belonged to them. Numbers 26:9. And the sons of Eliab, Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. This is that Dathan and Abiram which were famous in the congregation, who strove against Moses and against Aaron in the company of Korah, when they strove against the Lord. Notice the last line, strove against the Lord. So all the brouhaha was actually a complaint about how God was doing things, wasn't it? Yerp. All those who are not his will always strive against him, and the Nicolaitans are not his. Jesus hates them because they are opposed to the Godhead itself and the will of God, the Father. they contend with the Holy Spirit. Now, Jesus had warned that one could say anything against him, but they needed to watch their words when it came to the Spirit, because that would be unforgivable. Jesus came to die to be sacrificed, but the Spirit was not in that role. Neither was the Father. You see, you can treat with a sacrifice because it's devoted for destruction, but with the deity to which it's being offered up? Really? But no. In The Burden of Balaam from Bob Newman, we have Jude 11. Woe to them. They've traveled the path of Cain. They're rushing headlong into the error of Balaam, and they've perished in Korah's rebellion. Now, in the original article, the word was gainsaying because Bob defaulted to original King James, whereas I'm using the New King James. So the word translation is rebellion. And so let's do a little word lookup, shall we? Gainsay. Deny or contradict a fact or statement. The impact of the railroads cannot be gainsaid. Speak against or oppose someone. No one could gainsay her. Merriam-Webster's adds this: to declare to be untrue or invalid, contradict, oppose. Another word for this is to rebel. But look at the above. To deny is also to suppress. Right here we have a whole other can of worms to open. Romans 1:18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So to those who suppress the truth, or Jesus, who is the truth, or the Spirit of truth, who leads us into all the truth/pasture to feed on quote-unquote truth, these perish. In the end, Samuel's words ring out. 1 Samuel 15:23. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance is like the wickedness of idolatry. Because you've rejected the word of the Lord, he's rejected you as king. Now, while this was being said to a king, namely Saul, the premise of part A is the point. Rebellion is like divination. So what's divination? The fine art of connecting with the spirit realm via ritual, usually a sacrifice whose entrails are quote-unquote read like quote-unquote tarot cards in order to quote-unquote gain insight. But with it goes arrogance, and that is like idolatry. Will they go hand in hand? For only one seeking another source will inquire by means outside the law of the written word, and the earth swallowed them up, or the rock crushed them, as he will all who oppose him. Finally, this. If you notice, this is a challenge from within the body. A team-up of sacred and secular authority to challenge what? The Lord's work, will, and appointed, anointed individuals. This is nothing new here. This was the thing with these people all through the wilderness. What we have here is tare seed. These are working in the ministry under the called man or woman of God, and they're important. But like Hillel of old, they want more. They want top spot. But they were not called to it. This is the thing that does the thing God hates and calls an abomination. Causes division. What's the problem with a church split? It hurts the sheep. The servants get out of order, and the stewards as well. And the bride in the midst, well, she's just out of luck. Now, I need to say this. Sometimes God does call up a rebellion. Sometimes he does call for the civil war. If one is in charge is not of him, and one is found within who will be useful, and that he can call, equip, and anoint, he will do so. That person, however, will be, quote-unquote, called out. Those who are called out as well might follow. You see the difference? No rebellion, just a resignation letter and a walk-off. Now the sheep must decide if the call is the shepherd's voice or not. Now the children must decide if father hasn't just left the house. Now the servants will need to reevaluate their pledges as to who is in the will of God and who is not. And they might just resign their posts as well as the stewards. The rest will not be troubled. Oh, they might be ruffled for a hot moment until the tare lays down his/her law to call them all back into order of the house. But to challenge God's work or to try to usurp it, bad idea. This is the type of thing when it challenges God, it ought to be put out. It's not his or needs helping. But what did Paul say? Deal with it. Talk to the person. Get to the root of the problem, which is usually a root of bitterness, as in the gall of bitterness. If it's surmised and revealed by God that this is not his, you let it go where it will. it is only going to do harm to his. But you forgive. The path of Cain? Well, that's for another day. And that will do it for this episode of This and That. Until then,